Welcome to the Ultimate Sports Podcast. The guest of the night co-hosts the Jets All the Way podcast and writes for Elite Sports New York. Geoff Magliochetti, how are you doing tonight?
Madison Miller, I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
I'm good. All right, there is some big news in baseball today. I was not initially planning on starting with this, but this big news broke that has to be discussed. So the Wilpons are selling the Mets, and essentially it's going to be within like 5 years until like these new people officially take over. What do you make of this huge news that is monumental for New York sports?
It's probably the best acquisition the Mets have made in a long, long time because, every time we have to hear the Wilpons, there's just been hesitation on their end to spend. There's been hesitation to truly turn this team into a contender. But now this is big news for them. This is really the start of a new era. We've seen so many times. There have been so many false starts in terms of the Mets resurgence. We've heard so many times, this is it, they're finally going to do it. But Steve Cohen, now about to buy majority ownership of this team, I think this is a true step in the right direction. Once he takes over, I believe I read somewhere, he is going to be MLB's richest owner at $9.2 billion. And this is the type of thing you need. It screams New York right now. The glitz, the glamour. He is, he could be a new definition of New York baseball if this pans out. Of course, this is the Mets, so who knows if it will pan out. Everybody has to be on board with this. It has to be, the right people in there. You got to get the right names, the right general manager and whatnot. So, it's going to be real interesting to see. Now, Mets fans shouldn't probably expect, instantaneous results. The NL East, for at least the foreseeable future, seems to be dominated by the Atlanta Braves and, of course, the defending champion Washington Nationals, provided they're able to keep some of their bigger names down there in Washington this year. But you know what? This is the best bastion of hope that the Mets have had in a long, long time. I'm eager to see where this leads.
Yeah, it's really a stunner to me, and I am very happy for Mets fans, and everybody was going nuts about it on Twitter. All the sports radio talk people are like really intrigued by this as well. And speaking of New York baseball teams, the Yankees are reportedly hot and heavy for trying to pursue Garrett Cole and even Steven Strasburg as well. So there's a lot of speculation that they could very possibly land one of them. What is the likelihood you think that they do land one of them?
I do think it's likely, although I'm very interested now to see the what the price tag is going to be on these guys, especially after news, which I'm sure you saw came out of the Winter Meetings today with Zach Wheeler signing with the Philadelphia Phillies on a 5-year, $118 million deal. So if Zach Wheeler is going for $118 million, I can only imagine what the price tags are going to be on guys like Cole and Strasburg. And the Yankees were actually recently connected to as well to Madison Bumgarner. But the Yankees must emerge with at least one of these two names, either Cole or Strasburg, out from this free agency period. Because, I think you and I had discussed it before on this very podcast, as a matter of fact. The Yankees need to start being the Yankees again, in the sense that, they need to start going after the marquee free agents, giving them money, and, having the pomp and circumstance around them. So this needs to be something where they emerge victorious out of this. People could say all they want about, they have a young core, they'll be fine. But a lot of people don't seem to realize that guys like Aaron Judge, guys like Gary Sanchez, even Gleyber Torres to a lesser extent, they're somewhat, in terms of quote-unquote young guys, up there in age, approaching their mid-20s at this point. They're not going to be around forever, in other words. So, you have to strike while the iron is high. And the iron is pretty hot right now. The Yankees are rolling off 3 consecutive playoff appearances right now. I've said that you could say it's every year since 1992. Other teams would give their left arms to, quote-unquote, struggle the way the Yankees have struggled over the past 2 decades plus. Because, there has been a losing season in that span since. A season like last year, people in, say, I don't know, probably like Milwaukee or like the Texas, they would give their left arms for a season like that to come 2 games short of going to the World Series. So I really think the Yankees, though, they need to start being the Yankees again in the sense that they need to emerge with a marquee free agent. And right now, Madison Bumgarner is not that guy. It's almost like the Knicks at this point where, every offseason we have to hear about the Knicks. Like, oh, we'll get this marquee free agent, we'll be fine. We'll get that marquee free agent, we'll be fine. Then summer comes and it's like, oh, no, we missed out on all of them. Time to bring in an overpriced, veteran who is more than likely over the hill. That would be, at this point, probably Madison Bumgarner, who did display flashes of his old brilliance last season, but nowhere near the World Series champion we've become accustomed to. This Garrett Cole situation really reminds me a little bit when they were recording CC Sabathia all those years back, in the sense that the general consensus was that, CC was a West Coast guy, and there was no way he was going to come to New York. You had to scare him away from, the Los Angeleses and the Anaheims out there. And starting to get the same feeling with Cole right now. Same thing, West Coast guy, might be a little rebuffed, might be a little upset that the Yankees passed on him before, but now the Yankees have to break open their bank, get the check there, and start being the Yankees again. Start getting there, get the missing piece that will eventually lead to a 28th World Series title.
Yeah, I actually think it's more likely that they will sign him than I thought maybe 2 days ago. And even Michael Kay, I listen to his show all the time, and he was skeptical at first, and now he's starting to come around a little bit on it because they flew out to California. I really think they're serious about this, and it's going to be a disappointment if they miss out on one of those 2 guys for sure. And speaking of that Zach Wheeler contract you mentioned, do you think he got overpaid by Philadelphia, or do you think he's worth that?
I do think it's a little overpaid for the time being. I mean, in Philadelphia, you have a decent lineup there as is, and it's the playoffs basically because what starting pitchers were really going to step up in there last season. I mean, Philly's pitching, it's okay, but they really needed the type of guy that can give you 5 to 6 innings reliably in this league. And you know what? It's a lot at the time, but it's kind of what the Phillies need right now. It's not the thing that they wanted, but it's the kind of deal that they needed right now. They needed to bolster their pitching. They needed to go out there and make a flashy signing. It's basically doing what the Yankees are doing right now, except they did it on a much smaller scale. I mean, there is a difference between New York baseball and Philadelphia baseball in a way, in the sense that New York, make it here, you make it anywhere.
Yep.
Now you look at what happened last season with Philadelphia. 81 and 81. Their ERA was 4.53 as a team, good for 17th best in the entirety of Major League Baseball. 3 complete games and 7 shutouts. So those are decent numbers. But you know what? The Phillies need more, especially if you're going to be competing in a place like the NL East, where you're again faced with the Atlanta Braves, who are really on the up and up. When you're faced with the defending champion Washington Nationals, you need to bolster your pitching in there. So I don't fully agree with the Wheeler signing, giving him all that money, and it's only going to make the market even crazier moving forward. But I do think it's the type of thing that the Phillies needed right now.
Yes. I agree with you that they overpaid. I actually predicted that they were going to sign Strasburg because I thought about Bryce Harper, and I'm thinking, oh, they need an ace type of guy to go with Nola, and I could see Bryce Harper kind of recruiting him. And I'm probably going to be wrong about that one now, but you never know. I saw a report today that Philadelphia is still checking in on those guys, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to sign them. But we shall see. Who do you think will be the biggest name traded in baseball this offseason? Could very well happen at the winter meetings. It could very well happen after, or even before for that matter, because don't forget, Giancarlo Stanton was traded before the winter meetings a few years ago.
I think Josh Hader right now is the name everyone needs to keep an eye on. The Brewers are reportedly open to dealing him. I definitely think that's going to be someone to keep an eye on. I heard both New York teams are attempting to court Milwaukee in their pursuit of him. I don't think the Yankees should really, focus on him too intently. They're already looking at that. They're already looking at the reliever from Oakland, Blake Trinian, for their bullpen as well. They are reportedly high on that guy. So I think the Yankees should steer clear. The Mets, however, could use a guy like Hader in their bullpen right now. Brings the type of controversy that you almost don't need from a rebuilding team, still stemming from his social media posts in a way, still facing a little bit of flack for that. But, he's the type of guy that can really bolster a bullpen, something, of course, the Mets had major trouble with last season. They probably could have won 90 games if not for the bullpen woes of what happened in their last year. They could have contended for the playoff spot. I mean, they only finished, 6 or 8 games out, something like that?
Yeah.
I mean, that they blew so many games last year, and he could be the type of guy. They won 86 and 76 last year. You could have won 92 games. Really, you flip the script on 6 of those. You hold down 6 more leads, and you could well likely be a playoff team with over 90 wins. So he is the type of guy that the Mets should keep an eye on moving forward. And also in terms of batters in the lineup, I definitely foresee Mookie Betts being dealt this offseason. Things just seem to gotten really icy between those two sides. I heard, we've been through the typical social media references, and Mookie has quote unquote unfollowed the Red Sox on Twitter and whatnot. So I definitely think that he is the type of guy, if you're looking for a batter to be dealt this offseason, he's the name you have to most keep an eye on.
Yeah, and 2 other names that I think are in play as well: Francisco Lindor of Cleveland and Chris Bryant of Chicago. I predicted that both of those guys and Mookie Betts would be dealt this offseason, and that was obviously before the Brewers Josh Hader stuff got announced as well. So I didn't have Josh Hader getting traded, but I think that's actually pretty likely.
I can totally see Bryant on that point. I think the Cubs are trying, they're trying to start a new era of their own down there, almost kind of in a way chasing away the ghosts of 2016. Of course, new manager David Ross notwithstanding, starting a new era in the sense that they bid Joe Madden farewell, and they're starting to trade away others as well. They're looking to contend, but they're finally looking to no longer play in the shadow of the historic 2016 squad, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from on that. Quick hockey thing I want to talk about real quick. John Hines was fired as the New Jersey Devils head coach. What was your reaction to that? And did you think he'd be the first one to be fired between him, New York's Pat Shurmur, and or I should say the Giants' Pat Shurmur and the Knicks' David Fizdale in terms of New York coaches on the hot seat?
Well, I think of those 3, I think that Hines had the hottest seat. I'm not surprised he went first. Because, he was in his 5th year, and those other 2 you mentioned are, by comparison, in just their 2nd years, respectively.
Yeah.
But I do think that this was long overdue, frankly, because the Devils basically quit on Hines out there. The effort was next to nil. I'm sure you saw it in their final game against the Buffalo Sabres, blown off the ice 6-1, and they actually caught a reaction of some of the Sabres players during the game. They looked almost shocked at how easy it was to score on them out there. So I'm really surprised that it took this long to bid Hines farewell, especially because this was a year in New Jersey that had so much hope in from the outset. They made some big name acquisitions. They brought in the prospect Nikita Gusev from Vegas. They brought in veterans P.K. Subban and Wayne Simmons. I really think that, and of course, Jack Hughes was brought in, and they did have some problems in goaltending still. Recently, finally bid farewell to Corey Schneider, but I do think that there was heightened expectations for New Jersey in Hines' 5th year on the job, and when you're in a place and you only reach the playoffs one time in 5 seasons, especially in a league like the NHL, where you have to actively try to miss the playoffs so often, in a league where over half the league makes it. The NBA is the same way, don't get me wrong, but yeah. I do think this was almost long overdue, and the Devils right now, they got some major ground to make up, and they almost won't be heartbroken if they miss the playoffs, which seems increasingly likely as this game goes on. Frankly, I think the final dagger should have been Saturday against the New York Rangers, where the Devils spent pretty much, I want to say, a third of the game literally on the power play, including a 5-minute major late in the game, and the Rangers ended up torching them for two shorthanded goals in that game, and a 4-0 win, in which they couldn't even get a goal on Rangers backup Alexander Georgiev. So I really think that this is long overdue, and not shocked at all he outlasted those other 2. But when you make the playoffs only one time in 5 seasons, your day of reckoning comes quickly.
Absolutely, especially in the market like New York, even though that the Devils are really New Jersey Devils. I thought that the Hines firing was overdue. I said it on my normal podcast today that this should have happened at the end of last season, and
Right.
I honestly thought that they were going to pull the trigger had they lost that nationally televised game against the Rangers earlier in the season, because didn't they bring somebody from the front office down to be on the bench with Hines or something for that game, and then they ended up winning 5-2 over the Rangers. It was a game that
Yeah.
Kenny Albert called on NBCSN. I just remember that very, very clear. And I remember thinking to myself, "Oh, had they lost this game, I think that would have been it for Hines." And then they waited another like month and a half after that to finally can him. And I told somebody on Twitter the other day that I thought the first of those three to be fired within Hines, Fizdale, and Shermer was going to be Hines, because the Devils, let's face it, were expected to be way better than the Giants and the Knicks. They were supposed to. Many people thought that was a playoff team before the season. Nobody had the Giants or the Knicks making the playoffs. People thought that the Devils were going to be a playoff team. Did you have them making the playoffs before the year? I didn't, because I wasn't sold on their goaltending, and I did predict Hines to get axed at the end of the season, but I didn't think the Devils were going to be this bad.
Yeah, this is just not good. And the thing is, I think you could make the same case for both Shermer and Fizdale in their respective situations. When you look at the New Jersey Devils as a team, we look at let's say you look at the returning players on the roster right now. Can you name a single player? And the same case goes for Giants and Knicks as well. Disregard the veterans for a second. Disregard the incoming veterans and the rookies. Like disregard Simmons and Subban and Jack Hughes and whatnot. Can you name one person on the Devils, or the Giants and the Knicks for that matter, a returning member of the Devils who has actively improved from last year to this? You can't, really. I can't name a single person who has, improved their play. Taylor Hall, it feels like his value seems to go down with each and every game as the Devils start to seek trade partners for him. So I definitely think that is a deciding factor. And I said the same thing about Shermer and Fizdale. So many young guys on that team have taken steps back, and each of those teams is also blessed with a very promising rookie, and that's just not the environment you need for that guy right now. The Devils have Hughes, the Giants have Jones, and to a lesser extent Saquon Barkley, who has clearly regressed from his rookie year. The Knicks have R.J. Barrett. So that is the hallmark of a veteran coach, and that is going to be your legacy when younger guys on this team, returning members, are not improving. So it's a move that had to be done, and I'm only surprised it took this long.
Yeah, exactly. Let's switch it over to the NFL. And you mentioned Daniel Jones. This was what I thought I was going to be opening this podcast with today. News breaks that Daniel Jones is likely not going to play due to the high ankle sprain, and Eli Manning is back as the Giants' starting quarterback. Do you think that the Giants should sit Jones the rest of the way, or do you think they should bring him back if he's ready to go next week to not hurt his development?
I think this is such an interesting issue and such an interesting question in the sense that when you're 2-10 like this, or I was talking about it earlier today about the Jets, as a matter of fact, on another program. I was saying when you're 2-10 or 4-8, far removed from the playoff picture, you're not going to make it. Obviously, you have a bittersweet gift granted to you. You have right now, the Giants anyway, and the Jets for that matter, 4 games of free research and development for the 2020 season, because there are going to be teams that you now have opportunities for guys to show their stuff and prove why they should be allowed to stick around for the rebuild going forward. And, be for the rebuild, for the potential days of redemption that are hopefully to come for this squad. And, it's this only gains a bigger sense of desperation when you realize just how high of a draft pick the Giants are going to have. They'll have the number 2 pick, of course, if everything, settles out. So in terms of Eli Manning right now, it would be nice to give him a nice little retirement tour, 4 final games where you could just reflect on the good times. And, hey, if he could beat the Philadelphia Eagles and derail their playoff trip, wouldn't that be an interesting way for the Eli Manning to end, as they do play the Eagles twice over the final 4 games? But here's the thing. You made this Daniel Jones move for a reason. You wanted to officially close the book on the Eli Manning era, and you wanted to move forward. Let Daniel Jones, only if he's fully healthy, of course. I mean, you don't need him coming back. You don't need him coming back at, say, 75% for next week's game, which is against the Miami Dolphins of all teams. You don't need Daniel Jones coming back and shattering that leg in 5 different places in a meaningless game against the 3-9, maybe 3-10 Miami Dolphins next week. You do not need that under any circumstance. So only if Jones is fully healthy and 100%, that's when you should insert him back in. Otherwise, enjoy this. Enjoy your final glimpse of Eli Manning in a Giants jersey, or at least the presumed final glimpse. Eli, of course, is in the final stages of his contract, and this probably will be the end of the line for him. So enjoy it. Give him a little retirement tour. Bid him farewell. If Jones is healthy, you have to commit to this. It's exactly why, you can't put Eli back in when Jones was having his turnover issues. Because I think we've seen it plenty of times where, the most recent example I can think of, and this is probably a bad example because they're two completely different quarterbacks in a sense. The Cleveland Browns a few years back, and their never-ending carousel of quarterbacks, they started Deshaun Kaiser in week 1. I know Kaiser's the 3rd-round pick, but again, it's the most recent and first example that comes to my mind. And they basically took Kaiser in and out and in and out and in and out of the lineup over a span of several weeks, and it just killed the kid's confidence right from the get-go. I don't think Kaiser was destined for NFL stardom, but at the same time, it didn't help that he was in such a toxic situation over there. So I definitely think you can't do that with Daniel Jones right now. And I think the same case goes for, in a more recent example, and perhaps more relevant, Josh Rosen down there. When it was down in Arizona and as the Cardinals trickled closer to the first pick, it kind of messed with his confidence a little bit. And, you go to Miami and you bring in a guy like Ryan Fitzpatrick. Frankly, if the Dolphins were trying to tank, the worst thing they could have done was bring in Ryan Fitzpatrick, the type of guy who's been ruining teams' draft picks since he got into the league in 2005. So, you bring in a capable NFL starter like that, a guy who could have still won games for you. Half the time you bring in these veterans, they're at the end of the line. They could fill in case of an emergency, but you mostly bring them in for your mentorship. Fitzpatrick proved he had a few things left in the tank, and it was basically told Rosen right from the get-go, okay, you're our guy for now, but if you mess up, you're going to the bench and we're putting Fitzpatrick in. So that happened, and now it feels like Rosen's confidence is completely shot. So I definitely think if Jones is 100% healthy, heck, 110% healthy, you have to put him back in. You have to commit to this.
Exactly, and right now he is not 100% healthy, and that's why they are going to Eli Manning for a little bit of a farewell tour here. Speaking of the Giants still, Steve Tisch spoke to NBC's Bruce Beck yesterday and made some comments about how he and John Mara have to be honest with the team and whatnot. That is not a good look, in my opinion, for Pat Shurmur and Dave Gettleman. I think it's a no-brainer that Shermer's gone. Do you think Gettleman could be out the door as well?
I don't think Gettleman's out the door just yet. I think he gets a little more time because, I think one thing that could potentially save him right now, there is a coach out there on the market that is perfect for him to step in, Ron Rivera. Mm-hmm. I mean, Dave Gettleman knows Rivera better than probably anyone in this league right now, having worked with him in Carolina all those years. And Ron Rivera fills in what the Giants need perfectly. He has shown he can foster a run game, doing so with guys like D'Angelo Williams, with John Stewart, and now up until most recently Christian McCaffrey in Carolina. So he can foster a run game there, worked well with defenses, and of course helped Cam Newton become the quarterback, the franchise face in Carolina for several years. And the Giants have someone that they're hoping that can become not just a franchise face, but a face for, the most popular city in the world, New York City. He can become a face of the most popular city in the world and the most popular city of the world's most popular sport, football. And I think that, Riverboat Ron will be so perfect for this organization. You need to bring in, I think, if you're the Giants, if you are gonna pull the trigger on Shurmur, which I think you should. I mean, once again, no one in this roster has really improved under his watch. You cannot bring in a retread. You need to bring in someone who's won before. And names like that, another name like that, for example, could be perhaps Jim Harbaugh, who won in San Francisco and has done decently in Michigan. Really hasn't won a big game per se, but Jim Harbaugh, should he become available after another shellacking at the hands of Ohio State, he's the type of guy you could bring in, for example. You don't want to bring in a retread like Jason Garrett, who, of course, has been connected to the Giants. Jason Garrett's the type of guy where, you'll win 10 games, but, you're not really going to go anywhere in the playoffs in a way. You'll go 8-8 for 3 years, and you'll have that 13-3, but you'll lose in the divisional round. You don't need a retread like that. And Shermer, unfortunately, was a retread in the sense that he had his opportunity in Cleveland, and it's just a type of guy. He's like the Wade Phillips of offense. He's a better coordinator than he is a head coach, and there's nothing wrong with that. Guys have made great money and made great careers out of being coordinators. So I think Romeo Crennel is the same way. I think we saw it this weekend in Houston during the Sunday night game against the New England Patriots. He did a decent job with the defense and stifling Tom Brady and that powerful offense, and made them look like nothing. So I definitely think that the Giants cannot bring in a retread. And if Edelman is able to convince his old friend Ron Rivera to step in, I think it would do wonders in terms of him prolonging his New York stay.
Yeah, and I like Ron Rivera. There's a lot of people that would hate the idea of Rivera coming in. I think Rivera did a fantastic job with the Panthers. He brought them to a Super Bowl, went 15-1, and they lost that Super Bowl because Von Miller was out of his mind. That's why they lost that Super Bowl. Cam Newton won an MVP under him. They just would need a really good offensive coordinator with Rivera, too, to help develop Daniel Jones. And obviously, I will never forget, Ron Rivera, in his third year at the Panthers, was on the hot seat. And they somehow won 12 games, and he won Coach of the Year. They were the 2 seed in the NFC, and that's when Ron Rivera really opened up a lot of eyes for people in the league. And then they won the division the next year, and the year the division was down, and then the following year was the 15-1 in the Super Bowl.
That's
and
right.
He won Coach of the Year 2 times. And yeah, so I'm a bigger Ron Rivera fan than most, and I certainly would not mind him as the next head coach of the New York Football Giants. But the thing is that I think there's a chance that Gettleman gets fired. And I think it's more likely than you think it is, because I just don't love, it didn't sound really promising what Steve Tisch had to say. So I could be wrong about Gettleman. And I had Panthers Ron Rivera written down, so we don't really have to talk more about Ron Rivera and the Panthers. Let's switch over before we go to college football. We'll do a rapid fire with all of our predictions for the big conference title games, and I'll have a couple random rapid fire questions at the end of this segment for college football. Let's start with the Pac-12 title game. Friday night, Oregon, Utah. Utah's giving 6.5. This is a very fascinating game. Utah's the number 5 team in the rankings. Who do you think wins this game, and why?
This is going to be a great game. Both sides have something to prove. Utah's going to try to prove that they should be able to take over the fourth college football playoff slot, because one of LSU or Georgia's going to lose because they're in the SEC title game. And on Oregon, you have Justin Herbert trying to prove he's still top pick material in Eugene. I think Utah takes this one. I think they fleshed better as a team this season. I think that they, as a team-oriented goal, they're going to come out firing. I'm going to take the Utes in that one.
I agree with you. I like the Utes. I think that they can win this game by double digits. I know the pressure's on Herbert to prove some NFL people wrong. I know he had a bit of a letdown at Arizona State a few weeks ago, and I actually picked Arizona State to win that game outright because I just had a gut feeling about that and Herm Edwards and everything, so I just took Arizona State to win, and I was right. And I just think pressure's on Oregon. I think that Utah is a little loose, and guess what? I actually think that they're going to get that last playoff spot over Oklahoma, which we'll save that conversation for a few more minutes. Next up, the Big 12 title game. You have Oklahoma, Baylor, 12 o'clock ABC. Who do you got in that one?
I'm going to take Oklahoma in that one. I think Jalen Hurts
another guy who has something to prove. He's going to do one. He's going to have one last big surprise for Alabama, one final quote unquote insult in a way. And I got to give Baylor credit. They've hung on to this thing as long as they could. Gotten some close contests. There was that triple overtime classic over in Fort Worth against TCU a couple weeks back. But it almost feels like Baylor is a disaster waiting to happen. You look at some of the games they've had on their schedule. They took them 2 overtimes to beat Texas Tech. They went to single digits with Iowa State, West Virginia. So it just feels like the magic on this Baylor train has run out. And I definitely think that Jalen Hurts has one more big surprise to show Norman and show Tuscaloosa. I'm going to take the Sooners in that one as well.
I'm going with the Sooners too, but I'll probably bet on the over because I just think there's going to be a lot of points in this game being scored. I just think that this is a shootout. I think Baylor's going to show up, actually, but I don't know if they'll cover the point spread, but I think that they'll keep it close for maybe 2.5 quarters. SEC title game, 4 o'clock on CBS. You have Georgia and LSU. This should be a very fun game. Who do you got in this one?
I'm going to take LSU. I think that LSU should be the number 1 team right now. I've been a little bit more impressed by them than Ohio State at this point. I'm going to take LSU. Call it historic bias, but this just feels like the type of game that Georgia was tailor-made to lose out there. They did it. They don't have to get to Alabama this time around, but still, that loss against South Carolina really sticks out to me and really rubs me the wrong way. So I really think I'm going to take LSU right now. Ed Orgeron has turned himself into one of the best coaches in the nation, and I think that LSU takes this one.
I'm going to take LSU too, but I think it's going to be a close game. I just think that Georgia always likes to keep these games close, but ultimately Joe Burrow will make the plays, and I think LSU wins a single-digit contest. ACC title game. I think this is kind of obvious. So instead of picking a straight-up winner, I'll just give you the point spread, which is Clemson by 29. Do you think they cover the number or not?
That's a bit much to ask. I think Virginia is at least going to – they'll both hang early. I think, first of all, you got to give credit to the Cavs. They've done a decent job. It's enough of a win almost for them to be in this position right now. And Virginia is in a spot. They're in a very dangerous spot from a Clemson standpoint where they have nothing to lose. When they beat Virginia Tech last week, that was Charlottesville's national title out there. They finally beat the Hokies. That was their win right there. So they're in a position where, when you got nothing to lose. I like to call it personally, I refer to it as 2017 New York Yankees syndrome, where you go to the playoffs, or in this case, a postseason game. You go to the playoffs, and you can do whatever you want. It's a win. You're there as is, and it's like Bob Dylan said, when you got nothing to lose. You can have a little throwaway playoff trip in there. So I definitely think that Virginia will hang with them, at least in the early going. But I do think Clemson will take this one convincingly, but fall a little bit short of that 29.5 spread.
I think Clemson's going to cover because they've been covering the last month and a half. And ever since their bye and since they crushed Florida State, they've been killing everybody by more than 30 points. I remember they came close to losing at Carolina a few months ago. And after that, they've been just rolling. So I think Clemson covers that number. Big Ten title game's very interesting. You have Ohio State and Wisconsin. These two teams met earlier in the season. Ohio State, I bet on them in that game to cover the point spread, and they pulled away late against Wisconsin. Do you think that Ohio State wins this by double digits, or Wisconsin keeps it close?
No, I think Wisconsin keeps this one close. I think the Badgers have a lot to prove. A lot of people writing them off, I feel, after they suffered some big loss earlier in the season. I think that a lot of people forgot about them in a way, and they're not a team you should forget because they have Taylor in the backfield and Cone at quarterback. I definitely think this isn't a team you shouldn't just toss to the side willy-nilly. So I think that the Badgers are going to come out there with something to prove. Simply put, I think this Ohio State team, it's a little too powerful for them to steal a win against, but the Badgers are going to come out and they're going to show America what they're missing in a way. A lot of people have basically written off Wisconsin since October. They went to Champaign and lost to the Fighting Illini of Illinois, and a lot of people just stopped caring about them after that. But last week they gave a nice little reminder they were here, a nice little throat-clearing win. It's to say, we're still a pretty darn good program. program ourselves and going on the road and beating their rivals from Minnesota 38-17, very convincing fashion. So I think that this matchup is going to be a lot closer this time around.
Yeah, the point spread was 16, which I thought was crazy. I thought that the spread would be somewhere like 13 or whatnot. I do think Wisconsin covers the point spread. I will probably bet the over, but ultimately I think that Justin Fields will lead Ohio State to the 1 seed of the college football playoff because I think they have the best resume in the country. I kind of disagree with you about them versus LSU, but it's a good argument, don't get me wrong, but they have better wins, and I think the Big Ten is a little bit better than the SEC this year. But it's close, though. A couple quick hitters in college football before we go. What do you make of Rutgers bringing back Greg Schiano?
I see it as desperate yet inspiring because, if you're Rutgers, you need something, anything, just to justify almost the mere existence of the program at this point because you're in the Big Ten right now and it's just a weekly slaughtering week in and week out. And when you look at this team, it's unfortunate because what kid in any part of the country is going to be told is going to want to voluntarily go to Rutgers in a way because if you're told you have Big Ten talent, you're going to want to go to Michigan. You're going to want to go to Penn State. You're going to want to go to Ohio State. You're not going to want to go to Rutgers. But, bringing Schiano, the guy who took this program to unprecedented heights, to the glory days of this long tortured program, I think it's a way. It's just something. Anything to kickstart a long dormant franchise. And people tend to forget how just truly awful Rutgers was before Schiano got here. They were in similar circumstances, trapped in the Big East in a way. Good programs in there too. You're dealing with, the Miamis, the Syracuses, the Boston Colleges back then.
Yep.
And now you're dealing with a whole new form of competition entirely in the Big Ten. So again, desperate yet inspiring. It's the thing you need. It's the desperate kickstart you need to at least get people interested in the program again. But at the same time, it does somewhat reek of desperation a little bit.
Yes, it does reek desperation, but at the same time, it's inspiring, and I do think it was their best option because as much as Joe Moorhead was an option, I think Schiano would have just excited that school a lot more because he obviously had a lot of success with them back earlier in the decade and then in the previous decade before he left to go to the Bucs. That's the thing. People forget this. He left to go to the Bucs. He did not get fired, and obviously his Bucs tenure did not last.
100% correct.
Yeah, and one more coaching thing before we get to the college football playoff. Clay Helton was brought back as USC's coach. Did this surprise you?
I'll put it this way. I bet even Jason Garrett in Dallas right now is looking at Clay Helton's job security in USC and going, wow, ooh, because, I thought he was a goner. Now, USC, they give them credit. They turned it on later in the season. I think what really solidified Helton's status right there, his status to return for 2020, was the convincing victory over UCLA in the last week of the season. Now, the USC-UCLA game, it's the type of game, at least in those circles, that can, make or break your career in a way. I think it's kind of what boosted some confidence in Chip Kelly last season. The Bruins were 3-8. I believe the Trojans were 5-5 at the time of last year's meeting, and UCLA pulled that victory off over at the Rose Bowl. And, it kept USC out of the bowl games and instilled some confidence in the Bruins moving forward. But he went out there and put up a 52-35 win, and that really solidified his fate out there. And I really think another thing that started to, trend in the right direction was what he was able to do with the freshman quarterback, Kedon Slovis, out there. Slovis, you look at his stats, yes, it was at the outlier, losing at home to number 7 Oregon by 32. He struggled in that game. But Slovis, over 4 of his final 5 games, threw for at least 400 yards, including a school record 515 in the aforementioned win over UCLA. Now, you want to talk about the great quarterbacks in USC history. That's something to really be proud of. You beat Carson Palmer, you beat Matt Weiner, you beat Mark Sanchez, you beat Rodney Peete, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that solidified his fate as well. But then again, USC, especially in the new century, is not used to, being 8-4, being, also rans in the Pac-12. So that's what made me so surprised that they brought back Helton for another year. But this final stretch in which he turned 3-3 into 8-4, and what will be presumably a decent bowl game. I'm not expecting say the Rose Bowl or anything like that. I think he could get something to one of those post-Christmas games, something like, I don't know, the Alamo Bowl or something like that.
That's where I have them pegged right now, Alamo.
Yeah, there you go. Or the Cheez-It Bowl or something like that. So I definitely think that's what saved Helton as he goes forward into yet another season, 2020. However, he's on thin ice. I think there's going to be some pressure on him to perform come 2020. I mean, you got to look at what lies ahead for USC on the future schedule in 2020. You want to take a look at their non-conference schedule they're going to be playing. They have a huge test to open next season. On Saturday, September 5th, 2020, they're going to be playing Alabama at AT&T Stadium, Dallas Cowboys Stadium in Arlington, Texas. So that's going to be a huge test for him to prove why he should be allowed to stay. So looking forward to that one.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that they're playing Bama. And Bama's probably not going to be as good next year because they lose Jerry Jeudy, they lose Tua. Maybe their defense improves, but you never know. And the whole recruiting signings haven't really happened yet, so we don't know what all the teams are really going to look like yet in college football next year. And Alabama's out of the college football playoff this year, and 4 different teams will be in the college football playoff this year. We know it's probably going to be Ohio State, Clemson, and LSU in there in no particular order. Who do you think is getting that last spot, Oklahoma or Utah?
I think right now it's going to be Oklahoma, because what concerns me about Utah and why I'm also very high on Utah, I forgot to mention before, one of the reasons I'm so high on Utah is that they have something they are very, 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 very desperate to prove. Because when you have as weak of a schedule as the Utes do, you need to go out there and wallop whatever good team you have coming to you. If you look at their schedule, their biggest high-profile win probably came back on October 19th at home against Arizona State, who was ranked number 17 at the time. They won that game 21-3. Over the past 3 weeks, they've really answered that calling and have really walloped their opponents following their bye week, which, of course, followed a visit to Seattle, where they beat Washington 33-28. Their past 3 games have been the following. They crushed UCLA 49-3, went into Tucson and beat Arizona 35-7, and recently closed the season out against Colorado, winning 45-15. So you need to go out there and really prove that you have some kind. Meanwhile, you look at Oklahoma's schedule right now. They currently own wins against 3 ranked teams. They beat Texas in the Red River Shootout. They beat Baylor earlier this season. And most recently on Saturday, they beat Oklahoma State in Stillwater in relatively convincing fashion of 34-16. You also want to look at that schedule. They went to UCLA with 48-14. They beat Kansas convincingly and Texas Tech and West Virginia as well. Their lone loss could be a bit of a blemish, losing to Kansas State 48-41 in Manhattan. But right now, also, you got to consider, too, Utah. They lost to a quality opponent as well. Their loss is probably a higher quality, falling 30-23 on Friday night to USC. But Oklahoma also might have, the season opener over Houston to fall back on. Houston, of course, had some expectations coming in before they got eaten alive by injuries out there, winning 49-31. So I definitely think that Oklahoma would get the bid right now, provided both teams win in relatively routine fashion on Saturday night. And I also think something you have to consider for Oklahoma as well. I think you're kidding. I think we're all kidding ourselves if you think that the committee doesn't have a certain form of bias towards certain teams. Like, for example, the reason I think Alabama stayed ranked so high after a loss at number 5, despite having a relatively very easy schedule, I think there was a bit of a historic bias towards Alabama in the sense like, well, I've been in every one since. We can't leave Alabama out. No. It's Alabama. So there was a bit of a recency bias in that regard. And I think another one of the biases that comes into play is what is this going to be a good matchup? And with Oklahoma, you do have those headlines that draw eyeballs, that draw people to the screen. Things like Jalen Hurts trying to prove Alabama wrong. Things like Lincoln Riley. Could this be his final stand before he goes and see NFL? I'm sure the Dallas Cowboys are very interested in him, much like they showed interest in Bob Stoops. But also, you have to consider, the Big 12 connotations with, it's such a high-powered conference. You routinely see teams score 40-plus points and still lose the game, much like Oklahoma did against KSU. So I definitely think there are biases among this committee that make Oklahoma more attractive than Utah, including the fact they're more of a traditional football power than the Utes have been. Much respect due to the Utes, of course. They have formed a fantastic football program up in Salt Lake City in the sense they went from mid-major darling to now true power contender in a Power 5 conference. But, right now I think, committee bias might keep them out of the playoff. Is it right? I don't think so at all, but I definitely think it's better than the previous systems we've had in determining a college football national champion.
My hot take is that I think Utah's getting in. And that is because I think that they're going to win by a larger victory than Oklahoma. I think Baylor hangs around in that game, and I just think that the committee's going to realize that Kansas State is a much worse team than USC, who is currently ranked. And
right.
USC, we were just talking about them and how Clay Helton saved his job. And that is a program that I think that is in a better spot right now than Kansas State. And Kansas State had a nice year under Chris Spielman in year one. But I just thought they were a little overrated because they upset Oklahoma and then they beat an overrated Mississippi State team. Meanwhile, USC had the big win over Utah and turned their season around after being 3-3. Although they had that ugly loss to Oregon, I completely get it. I actually had USC winning that game outright. I made a mistake in picking them in that game. But it was just a good performance by Justin Herbert and Oregon in that spot. But that's it. I just think USC's better than Kansas State, and I think that Utah will look more impressive on Friday night than Oklahoma will on Saturday. And that's my Utah over Oklahoma case. What do you make of that?
No, it's totally fair. I mean, give Kansas State some credit. They did go 8-4 this year. Recently wrapped up their season on a pretty high note, beating Iowa State, who was ranked 23rd in the CFP poll at the time, beating Iowa State 27-17. And, Kansas State does have some bad losses on their own, and so there's no bigger fan. There were no bigger fans in the country of KSU than Oklahoma. So they do have some tough losses. They did drop one to West Virginia at home in their penultimate home game. Needed a field goal to beat Texas Tech late. But I do think that, once again, I think that committee bias is probably going to keep Utah out of it when all is said and done, provided, of course, that Utah doesn't convincingly destroy Oregon off the field on Saturday. Oregon, that's right. Oregon on Saturday, and Oklahoma, of course, would have to have trouble with Baylor.
Yeah, and I actually think, like I said, I think Utah will have a larger margin of victory than Oklahoma come Saturday. So it was a pleasure, as always, to have you on today. Sorry about the technical difficulties throughout the podcast. My phone has had some issues today, but maybe it's just fluky. I hope you have a happy holidays, and we'll talk to you in the new year.
Yes, very much looking forward to it, Madison. Keep up great work. Don't worry at all about the technical difficulties. Always a pleasure to talk sports to you.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Have a great night.
Hey, you too.